And my husband told him, he said, that one there represents her brother that never got to come home from Korea. And the man said, you were just a little girl. And I said, yes. But I was so overcome with that. And I finally got my bearings together. And of course we went on. So later I told my husband, I said, you know, I would love to go to Washington and see. He said, honey, I would take you, but I just don't think that'd be a good idea. Mr. Jones, Dr. Jones, it has been all of those years.
Have you been to the memorial in Washington, D.C.?
I wanted to, but I know I can't. It's just, okay. I guess the reason his death, I never mourned my mother's death, and I was younger. But I guess maybe it was the combination of both of them. But it was his. He was fun-loving. He was about 6'3", broad-shouldered, jet black hair. And people loved him. He was full of laughter. He was very outgoing. He was very, very kind. And he called me baby sister. And he would, back then, Mr. Jones, I don't know how you were raised, but we were raised, Daddy worked, Daddy made a good living for us, but we were poor. But everybody we knew, Mr. Jones was poor. But you didn't think about that. You dealt with whatever was handed to you, and you tried to make the best of it.
Yeah.
And Mama died, and it was him that I turned to. And they hadn't been married very long. And he said he got to fly home. He was in Germany, and he got to fly home before she passed away. And my mother worshipped him. She absolutely adored him. Now, she loved us other children, and I know that she loved me, but he was such a fun-loving person. And if I got in trouble and he happened to be home, I flew to him, and he'd swing me up and put me on his shoulders, and Mama couldn't reach me. And then he would say, "Now, Mama, you're not gonna hurt the baby now. She didn't mean to do that." And of course, I thought that was just, he was my savior.
Yeah.
But he would even take me on a date with him, and I know the girls just loved that. But when he would come home for a weekend, he would stop at the school and come to my room and peck on the door, and he'd be in, uniform. And I asked my teacher, "Can I take Alice home?" And it made no difference what time of day it was. They'd say yes. He was very, very good looking, and all of the girls knew it. And I'd go with him, and he'd have an old piece of a card. He'd set me in his lap, and he'd put my hands up here. Of course, I was more than happy to put my hands up there. He'd say, "Honey, baby sister, just hold it between the lines." Of course, he was doing footwork, and I was guiding the car and doing pretty good with him when he would be home. Now, my daddy wouldn't let me do that, but he would.
Yeah.
But the day back then, Dr. Jones, the sheriff came to tell you when a soldier had been killed. So the sheriff of the county came, and my dad and him were friends, but they were on different voting sides. And he was running for sheriff again. And his daughter and I were in the same grade, and we were very close friends. And his car pulled in the drive on that hot June day. And I told Daddy, I said, Daddy, there's Leslie, that was his first name. And he's probably wanting you to vote for him. And he said, well, that'll be okay. So he got out, and I asked him, I run out on the porch, and I said, is Wanda with you? And he said, no, baby, she's not. And I thought that was kind of unusual. But he had a paper here in his shirt pocket, and he walked up on the steps, and Daddy came out on the porch, and he shook his hand, and he told him, said, let's sit out here, we'll get some lemonade. And the sheriff said, I've got some news, or I've got some paper. I don't remember how he worded it. But he told him, he said, we must sit down. And Daddy sat down, and Daddy was a dark-complected man like you, real brown-eyed, black hair. And the sheriff said, there's no way, I heard him say, there's no way. My dad's name was Guy. He said, there's no way, Guy, for me to make this easy. And he handed it. And Daddy took the paper. And my dad seemed to me like he turned white. And I remember he said, oh my God. And Leslie put his hand on his shoulder. And my aunt, see, this mama was already dead then. And my aunt was taking care of me on the farm, and she came out and she worshiped my daddy. He was her baby brother. And she came out and she said to Daddy, and spoke to the sheriff, and she said, God, what's wrong? And he said to her, Forrest is missing in action. That's the first thing they sent to prepare the family, I think, for the real. And she said, oh no, oh no. And I didn't want to hear no more. And I had a big old dog. And I remember grabbing him by the neck, and I flew off of the porch and around the house, and I went out in the field. By the bar. And the dog, I just fell down on the ground. And that dog licked my tears. And I got myself together as best I could. And I went back to the house. And I told Daddy, I said, Daddy, it's not true. It's not true. He would not leave me. He would never leave me. And I remember Daddy pulled me up in his lap and just sort of did this. And then I couldn't sleep. I could not sleep. Of course, Daddy couldn't sleep either. Nobody could sleep. And in a couple of days, or ever how long, then Daddy got the word that he had been killed. And that was it, the 23rd day of June. And we didn't get his body back until September. And from that time to that time, my dad went back to work to try to put his life back together. And how he could do that. Well, you do what you have to do. That, I know, I've been there and faced with that. You do what you have to do. And I know he must have hurt. Many tears he shed, nobody knew. So then, when his when he came home, they sent, back then, they sent him home by train. So his body came in to the depot. And of course the funeral home, the people that had prepared my mother, they were there to receive the body. And his daughter was 6 months old. She was born in around the 8th, I believe, of January, I believe is her birthday. And he flew. He had come out of the Army in the reserves, but Korea got really bad, and they called in all reserves. And he left Kentucky, and his wife delivered the baby right after he left. But I think they said that he was held in San Francisco for a few days, or maybe a week or whatever, but he never got to come back home. But all he ever heard, he heard his baby cry on the phone. But when we got his body, Daddy insisted, and of course the wife it was okay, but what we have to understand, she was only like maybe 19. He was 23 when he died. So she was maybe 19 and was left with an infant. No education. Family was poor. My family did, I guess, have it maybe a little easier than her family did. But her family was good people. And I loved to go to their house. They were so good to me. But they spent the last night at her parents' house. And when he took his shoes off, he set them down, and I think he kind of scooted under the bed, and he put his socks in there. Sometime later, after he had come home, after his body had been sent home, I always would go to their house and spend like a week in the summer. I went, and the bedroom that they had slept in for the last time, they just pulled the door to. Our family did. And I went in there, and being a kid that I was, I saw his shoes. And I couldn't stay. I couldn't stay anymore. Because it was just too much. So they took me home, and I never went back. I just couldn't go back. And it was just such a horrible time. And that's why every time I see a young man killed, my heart goes out to that family. I'm sorry, because you can go to our funerals in our family and it hurts, but there's nothing more hurtful than losing someone in a foreign land and their bodies brought back, and you live the rest of your life with a hole in your heart. And the heart is the only organ in our body that can be totally, completely broken and still function. And that's what That's what war does to people. And people, you can push it away, you can bury it as deep as you can, but it has a way of lifting its ugly head. And you go on grieving, and sometimes you tell yourself, this is stupid, they've been dead for a long, long time. But they're still here, and their memory is still here. My sister could never, ever, ever, ever discuss his death. It tore her up, just like it did me. Her and him, see, were within 2 years of the other kids were 18, 16, and 14 when I was born. So I was raised.
You were 9 when he was.
Was raised almost like an only child.
You were 9 years old when your brother was.
I was 9. I had just turned 9 in July, and she died her birthday was the 12th of September. She died on the 12th day of October.
That's your mother?
My mother. And then he was home from Germany.
Yeah.
And at the funeral, we had an outside funeral, graveside. I sat in his lap. 2 years later, there was no lap.
Yeah. Do you know how he was killed in Korea? Did you ever get that information about?
Do what?
Do you know? Did you ever receive information about how he was killed in Korea? Was it combat or?
He was a tank commander, and the story is they had pulled back and was marred in the mud, and they left the hatch open. And I think it was a hand grenade that was thrown in, and I think he was the only one that was killed. And my sister went, now, this is bits and pieces. My sister went and talked to a man that knew my brother, and she said she like to never got him to talk to her. But he finally did. She wanted to know if he was killed instantly. And that guy told her, said no, he wasn't killed instantly. They must have got him back to medics, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, she wanted to know if he was conscious. And did he say anything? And the guy told her, said, all they told me was that he said the word mama. And that was it. He died. But the day before the message came that he was missing in action, I went to the mailbox because me and my aunt would write to me. And I went to the mailbox, and I came in, and her letter had come back. And I went to her. She was a sweet, lovely, kind, dear woman. And I told her name was Cora, and all of us kids called her Aunt Corey. And I said, oh, Aunt Corey, our letter come back. And she took the letter from me and looked at it. And she sat down at the table, and she was a little bitty woman. Sat down at the table, and I had been writing on the tablet or pad or whatever, and she got my pencil, and she laid that letter down, and I'd never seen that. I've never seen it since. But she took that lead pencil and went around that entire envelope and blacked it. I never knew what that was until many, many years later. And when I was working with the elderly, I was talking to a lady that had lost a son in World War II. And I told her about that. She said, honey, do you not know what that was? And I said, no, do you? She said, a long time ago, there was a song during, I think it must have been during World War I. The letter that was returned edged in black. And I never knew what happened to that letter.